gotta take the crooked with the straights. That's what Papa used to say. He used to say that when he struck out. I seen him strike out 3 times in a row. The next time up, he hit the ball over the grandstand. Right up there in Homestead Field. He wasn't satisfied hitting in the seats. He wanted to hit over everything. And after the game, he had 200 people standing around waiting to shake his hand. You gotta take the crookeds with the straights. Oh, something else.
Hey guys, welcome to the Bible verse by verse. Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible verse by verse, a plain and simple study through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're currently now in Genesis chapter 5, and this chapter, we're not going to spend too much time on it, and this is why. I'm tempted to spend a lot of time on it, but there's a lot of information here that the Bible does not give us a lot of information. It's going to tell us the genealogies, and one of the most fascinating, of course, things about this chapter is the long lives that they live in the early or first days of man after the fall. And then what we're going to see, there are 2 things. We're going to see these long lives listed, but we don't know why. We don't know, but the purpose is, we know that they populate the earth. And then the other aspect is that we're showing the, again, bloodline of Jesus. This is the godly line. This is the reason why, we have this. So again, it's tempting as it is. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Okay. Verse 1 says, "These are the family records of the descendants of Adam on the day that God created man. He made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female when they were created. And he blessed them and called them man." Interesting that God calls male and female man. So this is, again, if we go back to the very beginning, we see this sort of language here. God creates Adam and Eve, or Adam, male and female. Then he said, and God called them man, because Eve came out of man, obviously. Verse 3, excuse me, Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness, according to his image, and his name is Seth. Now, very interesting point here. Again, we don't have a lot of information, but we get a timeline somewhat of how long. In other words, how long was Adam and Eve in the garden? Well, even though we don't know that, but we are getting somewhat of a timeline. We know that Adam was 130 years when he fathered Seth. So if we kind of go back with that, how old was Cain and Abel? Cain is not mentioned here. Why? Because this is not the godly line. But it is interesting that Adam and Eve could have been in the garden for decades before they sinned. Just going off of this kind of genealogy here. Adam was 130 when Seth was born. Then that means Cain and Abel could have been around when they were 100, maybe, right? Think about it, 100. We don't know. Again, it's not a lot of information. But this certainly suggests that Adam and Eve was in the garden for quite some time before they sinned, which is interesting. Now, on the other hand, they could have sinned early, and it's just one of the statements, remember, at the end of chapter 4 was that with the beginning of Seth, you do begin to see the men calling upon the name of the Lord. So we don't know, but it's just kind of interesting here, how, in terms of how you want to look at how long Adam and Eve was in the garden before they fell. And then afterwards, we see a rapid growth because at the time of Cain and Abel, Cain was very much aware of people. In fact, he was afraid that people would haunt him over the mark. Okay? So, again, just kind of fascinating. I would love to know. But anyway, verse 3 again. Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Adam lived 800 years after the birth of Seth, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So again, we know that he was fathering sons and daughters. So for this, think about this, for this 130 years, he could have been fathering a whole lot of sons and daughters. And think about this, not only from Eve. Now just think about this. Let's just say, just a thought, right? 30 years after the fall, right? 30 years after the fall, just think about it. They start having children, and the corruption, the curse, the sin wasn't as bad. How long would it take to populate the earth? How long would it take to populate the earth in just 100 years? You could have millions of people by this time. So verse 5, so Adam's life lasted 930 years, and then he died. So we get a timeline here of Adam's life. So for at least a millennium, almost 1,000 years, Adam is living. So when we talk about the first timeline between this chapter is going to bring us from Adam basically to Noah, which is probably about anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 years of this timeline here. Now, this is one of the reasons you will see people believe in it was called a young earth. And they believe that man was only on the earth about 6,000 years. Won't get into that debate. I don't think we don't have enough information to concretely say either way. But we can see here Adam lived to be 930 years and then he died. Verse 6. Seth was 105 years old when he fathered Enosh. Now again, it doesn't mean that he didn't father any other children. Remember, we're only interested in the godly line here. Verse 7, Seth lived 807 years after the birth of Enosh, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Seth's life lasted 912 years, then he died. Verse 9, Enosh was 90 years old when he fathered Kenan. Sorry about that. Enosh lived 850 years after the birth of Kenan, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Enosh's life lasted 905 years and he died. And Kenan was 70 years old when he fathered Mahalalel, and Kenan lived 840 years after the birth of Mahalalel, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Kenan's life lasted 910 years, then he died. And Mahalalel was 65 years old when he fathered Jared and Malachi. I'm sorry for mispronouncing these words, and I'm going to do that a lot, especially with these genealogies coming up. So just, again, yeah. He lived 830 years after the birth of Jared, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Mahalalel's life lasted 895 years, and then he died. Jared lived 162 years. I'm sorry, Jared was 162 years old when he fathered Enoch. Jared lived 800 years after the birth of Enoch, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Jared's life lasted 962 years. Now, he lived longer than Adam. And it almost, this right here, Jared becomes the second longest living person that we see here. Then it says, then he died. Verse 21, Enoch was 65 years old when he fathered Methuselah. We'll get to Methuselah in a minute, the longest living person. And after the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and fathered other sons and daughters. So Enoch's life lasted 365 years. Now, this is kind of a young life here, as we see with this timeline here. Only 365 years. Now, in the millennial reign of Christ, we're going to see these kinds of lifestyles, not lifestyle, but years of life lasting. We're going to see that. So let me see, verse 24. It says, Enoch walked with God, then he was not, because God took him. Now, this kind of jumps in here, which is very interesting. It kind of jumps in, and we see this life just taken. It said Enoch walked with God. We will know in Hebrews chapter 11 he is mentioned walking by faith in God. And God decided to take him, just snatch him away. He wasn't found. The other person who would be snatched away like this would be Elijah. And in that case, Elijah would be seen. We don't know if people saw, but a 365 years life, which is young in this time frame here, but notice he said the Lord took him. Now, we don't have any example of Enoch's life. Let me say this: there is an apocryphal book called Enoch. It is not really credited as being scripture, but hey. But Enoch, I'll say this, that the way that Enoch pleased God was by faith, not by good deeds. I'm not discrediting good deeds. The only reason why because religion promotes that. In other words, because he walked by faith, he did good deeds. But his belief, his faith in God was impressed God, so God took him. Verse 25 says, Methuselah was 87 years old when he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived 792 years after the birth of Lamech, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Methuselah's life lasted 960 years, and then he died. Now, of course, now Methuselah becomes the longest living person on the recorded history. 960 years, just some 31 years short of 1,000 years. Of course, Adam was designed to live longer, forever. And also keep this in mind too, that remember when God said that he banished Adam away from the garden, away from the tree of life, so that he would not eat and live forever. What we don't see here is what kind of lives did they live. Now think about that. What kind of lives did they live? They lived 900 years, but were they... I know, at least myself, let me speak for myself. I assume that they did live vibrant lives. But can we be sure, given that God, one of the reasons why God put Adam out is so that he couldn't live forever in a sinful state? Just a question. Like I said, a lot of these here, they raise questions and they don't give answers here. And no doubt, listen, and I'm going to say this, probably these guys, because they walked with God, they were godly people, no doubt, had healthy lives. We also, so I mean, so again, it's just, and then of course we see that this here is also telling us that these guys fathered other children. So at the same time, the earth is being populated. Okay, the earth is being populated. But of course, we have to wonder, right? I mean, of course, you got to wonder, man, what would it be like living 900 years? So in other words, if someone had lived a 1,000 years, that meant they would have been born in the 10th century, right? Just think about that. I mean, it's just, verse 28, it says, Lamech was 182 years when he fathered a son, and he named him Noah. So we come to Noah now. And when we get into chapter 6, from chapter 6 to chapter 9 will be the story of Noah. Excuse me. Saying this one will bring us relief from the agonizing labors of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. Now that's an interesting statement here. It does give us some insight. Okay? It does give us some insight that things wasn't as peachy and cream, right? In other words, the lives here. Notice he says, why did this one bring us relief? So having Noah, for some reason, said this would bring us relief. We don't know what relief he's talking about and why he thought Noah would do this. But notice what he says, agonizing labors of our hands caused by the ground that the Lord had cursed. Now think about that. Think about that right there. That's very interesting. So it wasn't as great. In other words, remember, Adam's sin brought the curse. They had to agonize and toil and work the land. So, verse 30. Lamech lived 595 years after Noah's birth, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Lamech's life lasted 777 years, and he died. And then it says, and Noah was 500 years old when he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, of course, we're going to come to Noah's story in the next 3 chapters. The flood. But what's interesting that we know that's going to happen here, that this is only the godly line, remember. These are the people who are calling on the name of the Lord. What we also have to understand is that in all of these sons and daughters, there is an increase of wickedness on the planet at this time here. As you come to Noah, sin is running rampant, violence, just again, extreme wickedness is happening. And this is what we're going to come to in the next 3 chapters, which will cause the flood. Okay? So the wickedness of man, and so we're about some 1,500 to 2,000 years range, which is kind of interesting. And look how corrupt man is. Now, this genealogy only deals with the godly line, so it almost looks like man is is not all right. That they're not, and we'll see that in the next chapter. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next study. All right.